Anyone here ever been deep sea fishing? Just let me get a raise of hands so I can see if I got some common ground. Oh, we got a lot of common. Good gracious, that's what I'm talking about. So I've been deep sea fishing only a few times, and so full disclosure, I'm not like an incredible fisherman. I don't claim to know all the fishing secrets or anything like that. I don't have any of it. My fishing experience is like you get that really stinky dough ball stuff, and you fish for catfish at the bottom of the lake. You let it sit there until they bite it, and then you reel them in. So I've actually never caught a fish by doing the thing where you throw it out there and you reel it back in. Like, I've never done it. I feel like I look really good when I do it. Like, I throw it out there and I kind of give it a little shake like this. You know what I'm saying? Like this right here. I've never got a fish to do it. Like, never in my entire life have I got one single fish that took my little shake and was like, I want to put that in my mouth. You know what I'm saying? It's never happened. Never one single solitary time. Not that it will never. You know what I'm saying? You feel me, right? So for sure, though, deep sea fishing, there's a couple different ways you can do it. And I've done both of them. There's one where you pay some money and you get on a boat with 500,000 other people and you get out there with your line and they ring this little bell and you can drop your line in. You can't really cast it, you just drop your line in. And then it goes down, and then when someone catches a fish, everyone else has to reel their things because you don't want their lines to get tangled. So it doesn't matter if you're done fishing, someone has caught a fish, so you got to reel it. So you have to reel it all back in so the lines don't get tangled. So I've done that. That's no good. That's awful. 10 out of 10 do not recommend. Right? And then I've also done some deep sea fishing where you went out and it's a smaller crew of people, and that was actually a lot of fun. There's one particular time, I was about 14 or 15 years old, and the church I was attending was doing this event where like dads could take their kids out deep sea fishing. And I was like, this is a really cool thing. So my dad signed up. We went down to a place called Dolphin Island. It was just south of here, and so we went down that way, and we were going to get in this boat, and we were going to go off. And so there's a few boats that were going out because there's a good little crew of us. We stayed in this really like seedy motel thing. It was super basic and kind of scary, but we stayed in it. And sure enough, we got on this boat the next morning. We were going out, and it was cool. We went a ways out, like a long time. We just rode for hours, it felt like, until you couldn't see land. And we were way out there on this boat. And there's probably 6 or 7 of us on this boat that's kind of making this thing happen. And then there's captain, and there's this guy that's helping the captain. His first mate, I guess, I don't know. Anyway, that's what we're out there, and it's going good. So we're fishing a little bit and catching a little, and nothing's really happening. And it's like, we got a better place. So pull it all back in. We got a better place. We're going to go to this other place. And then they said, hey, as we're going to the other place, we're going to hang these 2 poles off the back, and we're going to fish for something special. And so my mind, like, oh, let's go. And my mind is like, we're about to catch Jaws. That's what I'm thinking at 14 years old. Like, we're about to catch something significant. Let's go. And so they put it out there, and they put this big chunky bait on there, and they put it out there. I'm like, man, we're about to get it. And so I'm fascinated the whole time. Like, as we're traveling to this, I'm like watching it, and I'm watching it, and I'm watching. There's 2, and I'm right there on the back of the boat, right? All of a sudden, the one on the other side of the boat starts to bend. Boom, he got it. And I was like, hey, we got one. And all of a sudden, everything stops. And so they pull the other one in real quick. And like they're fighting, like, who wants to do it? Of course, the first mate guy's like, hey, who wants to do it? And this dad, not my dad, some other dad was like, hey, we'll do it. And he's like, okay, so he's doing it. I'm like, yes, we're about to get something. Let's go land this sucker. And so, man, they're getting in. And all of a sudden, the dad says, hey, you know what? Can my son do some? And he was like, oh, yeah, man. I'm like, that's the whole point, right? Son's going to do it. And so he takes it and he gives it to his son. His son's 8 years old. Now, in my mind, I was like, look, I get this is a father-son thing, but this is not the time, okay? This is not the time to father-son this bad boy, okay? Let's. He's 8 years old. We have freaking Jaws on the other end of this thing. An 8-year-old's not pulling in Jaws. I'm your guy. If there's a son going to do this, I'm your guy. So I didn't say it out loud. I might have said it with my face and my demeanor, but that's what's happening. And so that's what's happening. So we're kind of making this happen. So sure enough, we get all the way reeled in. This kid proves me wrong. He's got it in. It takes forever. But we got it in, and then he's communicating. He's like, now look, we got to keep some tension on the line. We don't want to let it go slack. So we got to communicate. And I was like, hold on, well, 8-year-olds don't communicate, bro. And so this fish is huge, and I don't remember what it is, but it's something big. Like, it's a big old fish. It's not Jaws, by the way, but it's a big old fish. And so they're communicating. All of a sudden, the 8-year-old, I don't know, a squirrel probably walked by in a tree. I'm not sure what happened. He's not paying attention. The line snaps, and off goes his fish, right? We never got it out of the water. We never got it in a net. There it goes. So I'm not happy. So I'm pouting a little bit. I'm a little pouty. And as I'm pouting, I'm sitting there back next to the engines, and there's some diesel fumes. And these diesel fumes are starting to get to me a little bit, and the water's getting a little choppy. I'm saying these diesel fumes, this is getting me. And so I'm still upset because freaking father-son moment ruined everything for everyone. And so I'm like, well, look, I got to do something about this because I'm not feeling good. And so I decided I'm going to take my pouty self down below deck because that's what you do. And I got a can of Sprite, and I got some crackers, and I got sick. And I got sick a few times, maybe 6 or 7 times. I lost count, but it was not good. Well, underneath the thing, there's this little place where you can sit down under there. It's completely gutted except for a place where you can sit, and there's like a little place you can put your feet. And they had little mats, like blue mats, like 3rd grade PE mats up under there, and that's what you sat on. So I was so sick, I fell asleep on the mat. And I had my can of Sprite and a cracker that was half eaten that I couldn't finish the rest because I was nervous, you know what I'm saying? Everything, you know what I'm saying? And so I fell asleep. Well, I woke up, I don't know how long later, and the Sprite had fallen over. And so I was in a pool of Sprite and drool, and the cracker had gotten soggy, and it was stuck right here next to my nose. It was incredible. It was the greatest experience of my entire life. The sea didn't get any better. I thought for sure I would be seasick, but it was just that one time, you know what I'm saying? So if you were thinking, hey, let's go deep sea fishing, and now you don't because I'm not, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. So if you want to give it a shot, we can give it a shot. I don't know if any of you have had an experience like that on the water. Surely the guy that we are talking about today, he didn't quite get seasick, though he probably should have. It would have turned out better for him. It's the book out of the Old Testament where this guy gets on a boat and things just kind of go crazy, goes nuts. Just to bring you up to speed, just in case you're new with us, the Old Testament is a section of the Bible that's written that tells the story of God, how he chose his people, and how the world started happening, and the things that took place that created a need for Jesus, but also the story of how we get to Jesus. So it sets up how the people of God get to a place where they could give us Jesus. And the New Testament picks up from Jesus, and it kind of fast forwards to the result of Jesus being here. And so this story we're going to look at today that involves a boat and some pretty rough water is in the Old Testament. So it's about the people of God and some things that the people of God experienced. The guy that we're looking at, his name is Jonah. And Jonah is a pretty renowned name in Christian circles. If you grew up in the church, or maybe have spent any time in the church, it might be a familiar name, and maybe the story seems fairly familiar to you. If that's you, then maybe we'll find something a little bit different this morning, or maybe we'll find something you haven't looked at before. But no doubt, as we get ready to wrap up, it's our hope that our discovery place gets us to a place where we say, you know what, there's something I need to make sure that I have addressed in my own life. I want to begin with the very beginning of Jonah. Before he gets on the boat, he has this incredible experience, and we find it in chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. It says this: The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai, go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, and this is what he said: Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. Now, this is a cool moment. This is an incredible moment, actually, and it's incredibly rare. We don't have moments where the word of the Lord comes to us, and it gives us two things. Not only does it tell us where we're supposed to go next, but it also tells us what we're supposed to do when we get there. That's rare. Right? I mean, there's so many moments in our own lives where it's like, man, I don't know what to do. I've got choices, and I've got a left, and I've got a right, and I got to figure out which road am I going to take. And so more than that, not only just the road am I going to take, what am I supposed to do when I get on the road? But the word of the Lord comes to Jonah and says, hey, I'm going to give you both. I'm going to tell you where you need to go, and then I'm going to make it even better. I'm going to tell you what specifically to do when you get there. And that's really, that's incredible. A partnership with God, where God says, hey, I've got this plan, I've got this vision, and I want you to come into this vision with me. I want you to be a part of it. I want you to be the person who speaks on my behalf. That's an incredible moment in anyone's life. If you get one of those moments, you probably should write it down. That's a really good reason to write a book. When God speaks to you and says, this is where I want you to go, and this is what I want you to do when you get there. But at the same time, for Jonah, it's also a pretty scary moment. Nineveh was the future capital of Assyria, about 550 or so miles from where Jonah was sitting. It's in what we know today as Mosul, Iraq. When ISIS was kind of doing their thing and destroying historical sites, they destroyed the historical city of Nineveh. And so up until just recently, it was a place that you could go and kind of see the remnants of what that city was, and it's mostly gone now, but just like I said, until about a decade ago, it was there for you to kind of see. But the particular people that dwelled in that city at the time were known for being just a brutal people, like an incredibly brutal people. I mean, there was nothing off limits for them when it came to war or preventative measures before war started. I mean, it was just absolutely horrendous what would happen. People feared the Assyrians. People feared what happened from the soldiers and the regime that kind of oversaw what Nineveh did. And so for sure, when Jonah thinks through places he wants to visit and people he wants to talk to about God, the people in Nineveh are not on his list, Not on his list at all. And so it's like, okay, this is a cool moment. I get to hear from God. I get a place and a specific calling of what to do when I get there. But it's also not my place, right? This is not where I want to do it. This is not my thing. And so what we see is that Jonah has a decision to make. And we see Jonah's decision in verse 3. But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. And so now the question that comes to mind is, if I were to be disobedient to God's call in my life, if I were to say, no, God, I don't want to do that, why would I run somewhere else? Like, why not just stay home? Like what was the point in him going somewhere else? Was he thinking in his mind, when he starts to see me go down to the boat, that he will just, check, Jonah's on his way. And then when I get in the boat and I start heading somewhere else, he won't have notice because he's doing other things. That's why he's just busy doing other things. So he saw me start in the direction I was supposed to, but he's not going to pay attention to the details. Is that what he was thinking? I don't know. I have no answer here. Because for sure, if I knew what God wanted me to do and I didn't want to do it, I would just stay home, But Jonah doesn't. He goes and he gets on a boat and he heads in the opposite direction. He goes somewhere else. You see, Jonah heard two voices. He heard God's voice very clear. I want you to go to this place, and this is what I want you to do when you get there. But then there's got to be another voice, though, because Jonah ends up doing something opposite. Now, whether it was an audible voice, the Bible doesn't tell us that. There's no clue or no indication that it would be an audible voice or that it would be as clear as what God was. Other than we see Jonah take a different direction, a different course of action. My guess is that it was the voice that happens inside of our head. And then all of a sudden he gets this clear direction of, man, this is what God wants for me. And then what happened up here was somehow he justified it or talked himself out of it or talked about how God doesn't know what he really wants or who knows what. And so he decided to follow the second voice. He decided to go in an opposite direction of where God had called him to. And I know what you're probably thinking. You're like, hey, hold on one second. I thought this story was about Jonah. When did you start talking about me? Jonah gets on the boat and he's like hanging out, doing his thing. I don't think it's like a Carnival cruise line or his buffets and those things. I think it's just pretty much standard A to B deal. He's on the boat and the storm starts happening. He's like, it's going nuts. And the people that are on the ship, they recognize this is not good. This is no good. We are not headed in a solid direction here. We got to do something. And so they start praying out loud. Like, hey, they're a polytheistic culture, so there's gods everywhere. And like, God of this, God of that. They're praying to all of them. Like, hey, please, whoever is doing this, can you put a stop to it? And they realize they've got to have someone else. They're not just gonna like man up and just like ride this thing out, like bucket bronco kind of thing. They realize, no, that they're about to get bucked off the bronco, right? Their ship's not gonna make it. And so they're crying out like, please, someone, somewhere. And they remember Jonah is on board. And so they go downstairs and Jonah's asleep, kind of on the playground mats, the third grade mats. I don't think he had a Sprite and a cracker. I think he's just absolutely asleep. He's sleeping. And so they wake him up. I'm like, hey, bro, we got a thing happening. Let's go. Like, come on, And Jonah's honest with him. He's like, hey, here's the deal. It's me, In fact, they cast lots, and there's a myriad of ways that you can cast lots, and we don't get the specifics, but basically there's some stones involved, or sometimes there's some sticks or some little pieces of just any kind of material that's got one side or the other. There's a myriad of ways that you can do it, but it doesn't give us the details. But ultimately what it does is sometimes for them it'd be just a random game of chance of who's going to be at fault, and that's how it would fall. This particular time, though, it seems like God sovereignly kind of works in whatever it is that they do to say, hey, this is I'm going to point out who's at fault, and it points towards Jonah. And so they're looking at Jonah. So obviously, because we just do this game of chance, these casting lots things, these people who didn't believe in God worked through it, their little game, and it showed towards Jonah. And Jonah's like, yeah, it's me. For sure, it's me. And so they start to ask him these questions. They say, tell us who is responsible for making all this trouble for us. What kind of work do you do? Where do you come from? What is your country? From what people are you? Right? So they're asking, like, hold on. So if it's you, let us help you solve this problem. And we know if we get some background information, we're going to start understanding exactly what it is that's happening. So tell us who you work for. What kind of work do you do? Where are you from? Where's your family from? Give us all the information, because obviously we're about to lose it and we're going to help you solve this problem, right? That's what they're asking. And Jonah replies to this. He says, he answered, I am a Hebrew and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. And so like, hey, here's the deal. Yeah, it's me. It's my fault. And they ask him these questions. He's like, I got a simple answer for you. I'm a Hebrew, which means just I'm part of Yahweh, Jehovah. I'm part of that God, monotheistic, only one God. I'm his people. I'm one of his people. I worship him. He's the God of the sea and the land, right? He made them both. Made them both. And at this point, I pause. And I'm asking the question, Jonah, did you hear what you just said? Look, Jonah, let me replay it back for you. I'm a Hebrew. I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. Jonah, did you hear what you just said? So what you're saying is, I worship God, but I don't obey God. I Sunday morning God, but I don't 167 hours of the week God. Is that what you're saying, Jonah? Like, I know the motions to go through. I know what worship looks like. I can do that. That's my guy. However, my worship doesn't actually translate into anything tangible. My worship doesn't translate into me living like I worship. Just giving you a reminder and a heads up. I've got a plan for Sunday mornings, and it's to follow God's plan. But the other 167 hours a week, I've got a plan. In other words, I can hear both voices, both the voice of God during my worship time, but then the rest of the time I listen to the other voice, the one that says things opposite of what God wants me to do. That's what Jonah's saying. Or maybe you're thinking to yourself, you're like, hold on one second. I thought this story was about Jonah. When did you start talking about me? It doesn't last long. Eventually, Jonah just, like, here's the deal. This is not going to stop. You're going to have to throw me over. You're going to have to throw me over. This is not going to stop. Because I worship him, I am very aware he typically gets what he wants. So you're going to have to throw me over. You're not going to be able to, like, there's no praying that's going to fix this, guys. It is what it is. So, and the first they're like, no, we're not doing that. No, we are not doing that. We're not going to do that. So they throw everything else. They start trying to row back to the land. It doesn't work. Like, the whole thing, it just falls apart. It doesn't work. And so finally they decide, all right, we're going to throw you over. Now, it doesn't tell us how they threw him over. In my mind, I'm envisioning like a brother and a sister throwing, or like two siblings throwing the youngest sibling into a pile of leaves, or I don't know, just up against a brick wall. Something like that. That's the way it works. And so I don't know if we're doing like a 1, a 2, and then someone's like, hey, are we throwing on 3, or is it like 3 and then throw? I don't know if that's what's happening. I don't know if there was no communication at all, and the legs go first, and the person holds the head, and his head hits the side as it goes out. I'm not sure of the details. What we do know is they threw him off the ship, and he falls into the water, and then the Bible says that the seas grow calm. And in my mind, if I'm Jonah, you know what I'm talking about. You jumped into a pile of water, bigger than a pile of water, I hope, a pool of water, or maybe you even jump into the ocean off the back of a boat, right? And you go under, and then you come back to the top. And if I'm back at the top of the water and everything is calm, I'm thinking in my mind, let me back on that boat. You know what I'm saying? Like, hey, that's all it was. He threw me in the water. But for sure, if I'm in the boat, I'm like, let's go. Deuces, brother. I don't know what you're about to do, but you about to, there it is. And then we find out what happens. It says the Lord sends this enormous fish and swallows Jonah. Right? Now, when I heard this story as a kid, I was like, that's some bull dookie, right? That's some bull dookie. This ain't right. This is not real. No, this is not real. I'll tell you, I was actually doing some reading and just seeing, like, man, what's the deal a few years back? And I found 3 different events. One's in the Princeton Theological Review, where they talk about these whalers that were off the New Falkland Islands. And there were 2 boats that went from a mothership, and they were whaling. And these 2 boats got out, and they were going to go and harpoon this deal, and they would attach it to the mothership, and once it was dead, they would go drag it into shore, and they would raise it up and do it. And so the whale got the best of them and did a little flip-flop, and then one boat goes under, one guy drowned, both of them drowned, or they thought was drowning. They get the whale, they take it back in, so it takes them all day to get back in. A full night goes by, and it's the end of the next day, and they've gotten to where they're like cutting open the blubber, and they're setting it aside, and they're processing it, and they get to the insides, and so they have to attach some tackle inside to the stomach to release it and to pull it out. And so they're doing that, and they realize there's something moving. And so they cut the thing open, and it's the guy that was on the boat. He had been in there, and he was still alive. And he had like burns all over his hands from the acid, but it wasn't quite 3 days, but about a day and a half, a little more than a day and a half. He was there. It took him 3 weeks to recover, but he was fine. 3 weeks later, he was just like a perfectly normal guy, right? So maybe it's not as much bulldog as I thought. How about that? And that wasn't even just God doing a miracle. That was just, hey, that's the way it works, right? When we think through this moment, we find Jonah in the belly of this fish. It doesn't say it was a whale, it just says this really great fish. And Jonah is there, and he has a conversation with God. He gets to a place where he doesn't have another option. He's like rock bottom, you know? He can't go anywhere else. He's stuck. You know, he has nothing else. And so he's got to decide, like, what am I going to do? Right? Now, I want to pause there for a second and ask the question, because maybe we're thinking, like, golly, Jonah, why are you like this? Like, God told you what he wanted. He set his expectations out in front of you, and then you decide to listen to a different voice and go the opposite way, and then you're creating all, like, how did you end up here? When we read this, it just, Jonah, come on. But the truth is, don't we do the same thing? Why do we need rock bottom for us to make a good decision? Why do we need that? And it's not like there's not plenty of examples around us. You know, as someone who's had addiction in my family, I know what that's like, to walk with someone as they hopefully get to rock bottom, because you realize it doesn't matter how much you love them or how much you care for them or how many resources you have to give towards them, that it's ultimately just their decision and they won't decide until they get rock bottom. For someone who's addicted, there's really just 3 outcomes. You're incarcerated, you lose your life to it, or you recover. That's it. That's it. That's the way it ends. And 2 of those are awful, right? Incarcerated and you lose your life. So I got like a 1 out of 3 chance, and it's probably even less than that, to be honest with you. You know, but only 1 out of 3 suits me in terms of how much I love this person or care for this person, right? Like, why do we do this? Why do we do that? Why do we have to only have 2 choices before we can make a good choice? I know, we were like, man, I thought we were talking about Jonah. When did this become about me? But Jonah does get it. And Jonah has this prayer, and I'm not going to read you the entire prayer. I just want to read how the prayer comes to a conclusion. This is what Jonah decides. He says, I will say, salvation comes from the Lord. And the Lord commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah onto dry land. Chapter 3. Then the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. Go to the great city of Nineveh and proclaim to it the message I give you. Man, a second time, God gives him a place to go and what to do when he gets there. A second time. This time he goes, and what's the message? The message is really clear. The message is, hey, you've got 40 days, Nineveh. You got 40 days to figure some things out, or you're going to be overtaken, right? You got 40 days to change the way you're living, to change the way you're going about things, or you're going to be overtaken. 40 days, right? Now, they could have been primed a bit. I've read a couple of different folks that talk about an eclipse that happened just about a week or so before, where they kind of see this moment happening, and maybe that primed it. I'm not sure. But for sure, what we do know is that Jonah walks in, and for some reason, everyone is super receptive to his message. Like, they hear that, hey, you got 40 days, and they're like in tune with this idea, and they're like, man, okay, yeah, let's make a change. Well, how do we, like, and so they just start crying out, like, man, please, we don't want to lose everything we've built, right? We don't want to do that. The word gets all the way to the king, and the king hears about it, and he's like, yes, we are all in, everybody. And in fact, nobody eat anything or drink anything. You know what? Let's go a step further. I don't even want your animals to eat or drink anything. until we get this thing figured out. We are going all in saying, God, please do not overtake us. Do not destroy us. Don't do that, right? Like everybody, like cows are not drinking, kitty cats are not drinking, none of them. No one's getting anything. The whole thing, all in. We fast forward it, and at the very end of chapter 3, this is the way God responds. When God saw what they did and how they turned from their evil ways, he relented and did not bring on them to the destruction he had threatened. Man, now that's a pretty good day, you know? I mean, it's over 100,000 people, you know? Now, I've imagined this. I've dreamed about it. Like, this would be cool. As a pastor, there are moments where it's like, man, when people decide to give their entire life to Jesus, you know, obviously Jesus wasn't here for this, right? This is getting us to Jesus. But in our context, when people give their entire lives to Jesus, man, that right there is like, that gets me up in the morning, you know? And so to be a part of it, that's solid for me. Can you imagine like over 100,000 people deciding we want to do things God's way because you just told them like, hey, this is what we need you to do, right? That would be like highlight of the year, of the life, like 100,000 people. Like that's unbelievable, you know? I'd be like, let's go. Me and Billy Graham, baby, you know what I'm talking about? That would be incredible, you know? Unbelievable even. Like, wow. And Jonah has that experience. Like, here we go. Except he's not that way. You know what he does? He pulls me. He goes and pouts. You know? That's what he does. He goes and pouts. In fact, he goes outside the city up on a hill where he can see the city. And he begins to sulk. And he sulks, and we find out why. It's because he's mad at God. He's mad because he knew it would turn out this way. That's what he says. He's like, I knew. This is why I didn't want to come here, God. Because I knew it would end up this way. Because you got so much compassion and mercy. And as soon as I started telling them that your little love thing would kick in, right? And now look where I am. I'm the guy who, if I go home, I'm the guy who told them and saved our arch nemesis, our big bullies, the people who have ruined everything that we've got, all of our people. I'm the guy who saved them from destruction. I wanted to be the guy to cause their destruction. You know what I'm saying? Like, can you send me as like a prophet to tell them, hey, here's the deal. We're about to burn this place down, right? Run if you want to, but the fire will still catch you. I'm just here to tell you because I'm the mouthpiece of God, right? Right? That's what he wanted to do. But no, that wasn't it. That's not what happened at all. He's like, man, I knew this would happen. I knew this would happen. That's why I didn't want to come here. You see, the God he worshiped, turns out he actually knew a good bit about. He knew this was God's MO. He knew that God's heart was all the people he's created. He knew that God wanted to give every single person a chance. So he's sitting out there and he's upset. In fact, he tells God he'd just rather die. He don't want to go home. I'd rather just die. And God gives him this plant, this like leafy bush thing that kind of grows up. And it's a miracle. Like it just miraculously grows. And it's hot outside. And so he's getting shade under this plant, this leafy bush. And he's kind of enjoying it a little bit. He's like, this is actually pretty nice. You know what I'm saying? Like I wanted to die, but this is nice. This is a nice leaf, nice bush, right? It's nice. And then God causes a worm to start eating on the plant. And he eats on it in a way that causes the plant to start withering and dying. And I'm just thinking, there's a bunch of times I'm like, Jonah, this is not what I would do if I were in this situation. Like if I have this fantastic leafy bush and I'm like enjoying it and there's a worm that starts crawling on it, you know what I'm going to do to the worm? I'm going to flick it. I'm going to go over to the worm and I'm not going to have no issue with it. I'm like, look, get off my leafy bush. And I'm going to flick it. And then, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to bury it in the sand. That's what I'm going to do. Like, you ain't coming back from this, you know what I'm saying? In fact, I might even flick it and then squish it and then bury it because he's impeding on my bush, my leafy bush. That's what I would do. Jonah doesn't do that, though, which, I mean, I get. The last time God sent an animal to him, it swallowed him. So maybe he's looking at the worm and he's like, I don't know if I can fit in there, so I'm just going to leave it alone. You know what I'm saying? Maybe that's what he's doing. I'm not sure. I don't know. But he decides to let it go, and sure enough, it withers and dies. And then he gets upset about the bush. And he tells God, he's like, God, I'd rather just die. That's the third time. Jonah said he didn't want to live when he was on the ship. Just throw me. I'll just die. Just throw me in the water. And just a couple days, like a couple minutes ago, more than a couple minutes ago, the day before, he said the same thing. Jonah realizes what God's going to do. He's like, I knew this was going to happen. I just want to die. Now he's got the leafy bush, and the leafy bush is gone, and now he just wants to die again. He's super dramatic. Good gracious. I just want to die. Right? That's what he's doing. And then God begins to have a conversation with him, because what he didn't know is that God was trying to teach him a lesson with the leafy bush. He said, hey, why are you concerned with this plant that I gave you? Why are you so concerned with it? You didn't cause it to grow. You didn't take care of it. It wasn't even your idea. Like, why are you so concerned with this thing? You know? He says, but you're not concerned with the people. Like, you're real concerned with this plant, but you're not concerned with my people. He says this, and should I not have a concern for the great city of Nineveh? This is God talking. Should I not have a concern for the great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left hand, and also many animals? He said, hey, here's the deal. Look, you were concerned about this bush that just grew up overnight. It's been around for like less than 24 hours. And all of a sudden, it living impacts whether or not you feel like you should live or die. And yet you show no concern for the over 100,000 people that, again, you had nothing to do with their creation. You didn't put them together in their mother's womb. You didn't help them grow. You didn't do any of those things. Yet you have no concern for them whatsoever. Which, by the way, God's saying, look, I made them both. I'm responsible for them both. Why are you not concerned for the things I'm concerned for, is what he's asking. But isn't that the truth? That a lot of times we are only concerned with the things that benefit us directly. You know, it's like, I got this leafy bush, and it's providing me what I need right now. And so if something happens to this, I'm upset because then I go without. But then we got these other people who impact our life negatively. We're not very concerned with them. In fact, the only concern we have for them is, can someone keep them from messing with the things I'm concerned about? I think when we look at this particular moment in the life of Jonah, we for sure want to come out on the positive end of it. I would say it this way. If God is concerned, I am concerned. I think that's where we want to be. If God is concerned, I am concerned. In other words, I want my heart to respond to it as his heart responds to it. Whatever that is. How God's heart responds, I want my heart to respond to it. Now that means that when God celebrates something, I want to be celebrating that. Like when God's like, man, this is what I'm talking about. This is the humanity I've been looking for. This is the kind of people that I want us to be. In those moments, we want to celebrate that because we want our heart to celebrate what God celebrates. And the same thing, when God is brokenhearted in a particular direction, we want to say, hey, we want our heart to break in that direction. That if God's upset about something that's happening in our community, we want to be upset about it too. We want to say, hey, this isn't right. We want to get our hands dirty and do something about it. We say, hey, this is no good. And when someone asks, well, what does it have to do with you? It actually doesn't have anything to do with me. But it has something to do with God. And when he hurts, I hurt because I want to be like him. And you might even say, well, what if my heart doesn't hurt for the people, right? The Assyrians with the people in Nineveh. My heart actually doesn't hurt for those people. It doesn't hurt for those people because they made my life miserable, and they made my dad's life miserable, and they made my granddad's life miserable. And to be honest with you, they might make my children's lives miserable. And so I'm not concerned with them. I know God is, but I'm not. So how can I act concerned? How do I get concerned when I'm not concerned? That's actually a pretty easy statement. Difficult to pull off, but easy statement. It's you decide you're actually going to do more than just worship God, but you're actually going to practice what you worship. And you've probably, at some level, either you've played or watched someone else play a sport, and you realize that practice is really important. Unless you're Allen Iverson. You know what I'm saying? Practice? Talking about practice? Only a few of you are Allen Iverson fans. Okay, that's fine. He didn't like to practice. Everybody else. Practice is important. And you might not know how to execute it perfectly, but that's what practice is for. You say, hey, I'm going to engage. I'm going to say, hey, look, here's the deal. I don't feel what I need to feel to move in that direction, but I know that God's moving in that direction, and so I'm going to jump in with it. Now, here's the problem that we've created in our particular culture. All right? Brace yourselves, because I'm about to step in it. The only way we typically show concern is how we vote. That's what we've decided. That's the way I'm going to show concern for things. That's it. Now, what happens? Let's get serious. What happens when God is concerned with things? It's a little red and some blue. What if God's concerned with things on both sides? So then how do you show your concern at a ballot box? So then we got to prioritize what we're more concerned about, right? We got to say, hey, all right, well, so there's some things over here God's interested in. There's some things over there God's interested in. And so now how do I choose? But that's what we've done. In fact, we've gotten so polarized in our particular community where we're afraid to show concern about things on the opposite side because we're afraid someone's going to think that that's how we voted. Right? We're like, hold on, I'm for sure. I want to make sure because my friends and my posse and all those kind of things, we're going to be this particular way. And I want to be concerned about these issues because these are important. And clearly God would be a part of this. But I also know for sure God is concerned about these other things. But I can't get really involved over here because as soon as I do, someone's going to look from my circle and say, oh, I didn't know he voted that way. That's interesting. I would have thought different. Well, you know what they will say? They'll probably say, I thought better of him. You know? Depending on which side, doesn't matter. Right? So is God calling us to have to choose a political identity to show concern? To be concerned about what he's concerned about? Surely not. Surely not. I don't want us to continue walking forward like that. I want us to be able to walk forward and get our hands dirty and say, I'm not going to wait until I get an opportunity to vote once every 2 years or 6 years or 4 years or every year, depending on which election we're kind of trying to figure out. I'm not going to wait on that to show my concern. In fact, sometimes we feel good about it, though. It's like, I got my voting sticker. I'm going to take my selfie. Everybody's going to know, here's the deal. This is another. I'll wait 2 weeks and then post something on Facebook that kind of gives an idea about how I voted, because I can't say it on the day that I voted because that's inappropriate. But 2 weeks later, I'm going to post something from someone else who's going to let everybody else know this is kind of how I lean, right? Those kind of things, right? And that's what we're going to do. This year, actually, if you're in Georgia, you get to vote twice. How about that? Hashtag runoff, right? So twice, you get to feel good about it, you know? Let's go. 2 times to be concerned. I am doubly concerned, you know? That can't be. That can't be. That's worse than just worshiping him on 1 hour a week. That's not what we are called to. And we don't have to apologize to anyone. We don't have to apologize to anyone. No one at all. Because they see us working at things that God's concerned with on both sides of the political aisle. You don't have to apologize to anybody. In fact, the only time apologies are necessary is when you apologize to God when you fail to be concerned about something that someone who votes differently than you is also concerned about, that God's also concerned about. That's when an apology is warranted. When you say, my bad, God, because of the stigma that comes with, I don't want to be labeled here, I've neglected to jump in. That's when an apology happens between you and God. Or maybe there's some human faces that you should probably look in the eye and say, you know what? I've kept you at arm's length because I didn't want anybody to think this, but honestly, I'd rather have to explain to someone else, maybe my dad or my uncle or my granddad or my best friends, or the girls' friends that I grew up with, or the people I went to college with, or a professor that, whatever those kind of things, I'd rather have to explain to them while I'm doing what I'm doing than have to explain to you why I didn't do what you were concerned for. That's what we got to get. Now here's the deal. When we talk about things that are as difficult as this, the truth is that there's probably some small circles and there's some small close little friend groups or some family groups where you'll be the first, and typically if you're the first, you're also the only, you know? If you're the first, oftentimes you're not only the first, you're the only. And so this is what we want to say. We want to say, hey, if I'm the only one concerned, if God's concerned, I'm concerned. If I'm the only one concerned, if God's concerned, I'm concerned. Now let's see how he wraps it up. Everybody get your phones out real quick. Just real quick. I know you're thinking, is this rhetorical? No, it's not rhetorical. For sure, get your phones out. And open Safari, or if you got a good phone, open Safari. If not, open whatever web browser you got on your Android. Right, open your web browser. Type in Jonah chapter 5, and we're going to read it together. Jonah chapter 5. We're going to read it together. Give you about 10 more seconds. Jonah chapter 5. So if you're like me, your Google is telling you it's John chapter 5 because they think you misspelled Jonah, because there's not a chapter 5 in Jonah. All right, it stops at 4. All right? Here's the deal. Some of you actually clicked into John chapter 5 and you're like, no, there's a 5. Oh, that is not how you spell Jonah. That's right. Yeah. Here's the deal. The story of Jonah ends with God letting him know, hey, you need to be concerned with what I'm concerned for. We don't know what Jonah does next. We have no idea. Right? Jonah chapter 5, we write it. I don't know if you noticed, but the story's been about Jonah all morning, but really the story's been about you and me all morning. And we write Jonah chapter 5. Because there's no doubt that the overwhelming majority of us have not been concerned with people that God are concerned for. And it doesn't mean that your concern means that they do whatever they want to apart from what God desires. Jonah went and said, hey, here's the deal. God wants you to change some things, right? So concern is not, don't pendulum swing to something silly, right? But for sure, all of us probably can say, hey, there's some folks that I am not concerned for them. Made their bed, they'll lie in it, right? If they weren't so divisive, da-da-da-da. I can't believe they've done this, da-da-da-da. I don't want to be identified with that. Hands off, someone else will fix it. So all of us can identify with where we're at here. The question becomes, how do we start becoming concerned with what God is concerned for, both in the celebration and the heartache? You and me are chapter 5. So what if I told you you couldn't write another sentence in your chapter 5? That it had to stop today, and that God was going to stand up and read chapter 5 out of your life out loud? Would he be really happy about your chapter 5? If you couldn't write another sentence, would he be okay with it? Or do we have some work to do? Because the good news is that every single person sitting here and those who are watching, I don't know how many more sentences you get to write, but for sure you get to still write some more sentences. So none of us are having to push pause. None of us are putting a period and wrapping it up today. So we have an opportunity. So go write chapter 5. And make sure it reflects the lesson that God wanted Jonah to learn in chapter 4. Be concerned for the things I'm concerned about. Which means that none of us can now say, well, I worship him for an hour a week, but the other 167, I kind of listen to a different voice. That's concerned about what we're concerned about, right? We want to be concerned about what God is concerned about. And no apologies to no one.